are several trailheads where you can hike or mountain bike. I'm sure we're quite anxious to get into Bryce. The national park is much more impressive. So unless we have tons of time, I'd maybe just save this stop for when we're driving away after finishing our Bryce visit. We're about to pass through two small red rock arches that were blasted out of sandstone fins in order to make way for the highway. We can make a very quick stop for this and take some pictures if you like, and I'll point out the best pullout. In 1925, on the highway, right before the first arch, there's a pullout with some space on the right. The space extends into the area between the two arches, so we should be able to find a spot and then walk to different vantage points. Finally, the windows widen to the point where entire vertical chunks erode away, leaving just the solitary detached hooters. While you don't have to attend one of the astronomy programs to appreciate Bryce's beautiful evening views, I do highly recommend checking one out. Those astronomers are full of fascinating bits of information, and because they give the talks almost every night, they get a lot of practice explaining these sometimes obscure concepts to us regular folk. Or at least this regular folk. Supernovas, planetary orbits, constellations, nebulas, black holes, red giants. Those are just some of the topics that get introduced at a regular astronomy talk. And after the talk is over, that's when the show begins. Several high-powered telescopes are set up, giving visitors the chance to peer up close at the rings of Saturn, the crater laser pointers. If we were really lucky, we might have wound up here during the annual astronomy festival, which takes place over 4 days in the middle of June. But at any time of year, let's make sure we get ourselves away from the light of the hotels and restaurants in town and drive into at least enroll in the lottery, ask a ranger at the visitor center. The ranger will make sure that you and everyone else in your party have appropriate shoes. Hiking boots are mandatory, and then give you a number for the drawing, held later in the day. From here, you'll be able to enjoy a vast panorama of the entire park stretching back to the north, with the sculpted amphitheaters dropping off the side of the plateau. If you look closely at the rim, you'll notice that the cliffs are pink. That's right. If we remember back to our geology, well, there you are, the first 4 steps of the grand staircase. Now, before you go, do take some time to check out the Bristlecone Pine Loop Trail. This short trail is less than a mile long, passing by trees that are an amazing 1,800 years old. Bristlecone pines are among the oldest living organisms on the planet and thrive in arid, rocky regions where little else grows. In California, there's even one at an astounding 5,000 years old. It's a pretty worthwhile trail that doesn't take all that long. The parking area is usually big enough for the number of visitors, but if not, just be patient as it shouldn't be too long before someone's ready to leave. Rainbow Point is right in front of the parking lot. For Yovimpa Point, use the trail that backtracks beside the... well, gently downhill. As I mentioned, for the drive back, I'm going to point out 6 different viewpoints that are going to be on our right, which is, of course, the direction that faces off the edge of the cliff of the plateau that we're driving on. If you don't want to stop at all the lookouts on the way back, the best two, in my opinion, are Agua Canyon and Natural Bridge. But if we do have the time, we have come all this way. I suggest that we stop at all of them. see the fossilized remains of the largest sand dune desert ever, and get familiar with rocks that span the age of the dinosaurs. Most rock at Capitol Reef is sedimentary. If we've been touring together in other places here in Utah, you'll remember me explaining that sedimentary rock is formed from layers. Sure, there are some examples of hoodoos, or some more fun names are goblins or fairy chimneys. Hoodoos can form when rock that is more resistant to erosion sits on top of rock that's softer. When you have wind and water today, well, not instantly, but eventually. Rocks in the national park are from the Mesozoic era, the age of the dinosaurs. The oldest Mesozoic rocks are made up of tidal flat and river sediments preserved in thin beds of red sandstones, siltstones, and mudstones that we're driving through now. During that era, Utah was near the equator, with large rivers that flowed to the west. As the North American tectonic plate moved northward into the arid climate zone, the rivers dried up and gave way to desert sand dunes. Imagine the Sahara Desert. That sand turned into thick sandstones on top of those old layers gathered by the rivers. We can conveniently see that in the cliffs beside us now and along the park's scenic drive later. Another shift back to more humid conditions saw the return of rivers and lakes, and those laid down candy-striped mudstones from Arizona to Montana on top of the desert. Area for the Chimney Rock hiking trail is coming up quickly on the cliff side of the road. It's a pretty nice hike if we had planned to do it, but it's also okay just to enjoy the view of the Chimney Rock as we drive by. You'll know which one it is. I know we're probably excited to get into Capitol Reef, but before we do, I'd like to tempt us into a if it works with our schedule, this is a really terrific spot to enjoy a sunset. It doesn't look like it from here, but we will see that the canyon is steep and deep. What's interesting here is that we're currently driving on top of what we have to look up to as the predominant thick base layer on the official scenic drive section of the park. The older rocks that we'll see inside the canyon are from the last period of the Paleozoic era, called the Permian period. Rocks at the bottom of the canyon are the white rim sandstone. If we've already been to Canyonlands National Park, this is the same distinctive white sandstone layer that often forms the rims of canyons there. You'll remember those views. If we haven't been to Canyonlands yet, you're going to see exactly what I mean. That white rim was once beach sand along the edge of a warm tropical ocean. Above the white rim sandstone is the permanent rocks in our time span.
U-turn at Sunset Point Trail.
We're nearing the end. I'm sure that you're suitably impressed and agree that this is area worth preserving. Somewhat surprisingly, it was two businessmen who provided the initial driving force to protect Capitol Reef. We usually expect business people to be more in favor of extracting or exploiting resources. But as early as 1914, Mormon settler and future politician Ephraim Portman Pectoll and his brother-in-law Joseph Hickman thought there was more value in attracting visitors to enjoy the unique environment and geological displays. They formed a club to promote the idea, releasing photos. The shapes we see in clouds. But as we've traveled, you will have noticed the names I use for the rock layers are not descriptive. That can seem to make it extra complicated to be sure of what we're trying to pick out. The convention among geologists is to name the layer according to the place where it was best, or maybe first, studied. Well, at least they didn't name them after themselves. Oh, look, Smith Layer. Oh, Johnson Rock. And this is the other Smith formation. No, not that Smith, the Smith with the green hat. It could have got a little confusing. So when I talk about Moenkopi Formation, which is at the bottom of the cliffs along here, Moenkopi is a place on the Hopi Reservation in Arizona. Above the Moenkopi is the Chinle Formation, described in detail at Chinle, Arizona. Above the Chinle and at the top of these cliffs is the massive cliff-forming Wingate Sandstone, named for Fort Wingate in New Mexico. All right. The next pullout we see on our right is a really great place to see the castle. The castle is made up of all three formations. I gotta say, it looks amazing, especially a little later in the day when the sun comes in from behind us. When we get onto the main scenic drive, we're going to spend more time examining the different layers and what they tell us. Turn to the right is the entrance to the main highlight of Capitol Reef National Park, the scenic drive. Since this is the heart of the park, we definitely do not want to miss it. As we Nature Center will be on our right after this bend. It's across the road from the blacksmith shop. The Nature Center has displays and information especially aimed for kids. If we have any budding junior rangers on board, or dare I say, the much cooler budding junior geologists, then it's a pretty entertaining diversion. Though if you've been listening to my tour, if you go in there, they might already think you're an expert. And you already know why it's called Ripple Rock. If we don't stop, we'll be back at the highway junction in just a minute or two.
Place is amazing.
Well, it looks like we're heading eastbound. Now, we are still within the boundaries of Capitol Reef National Park and will be for about another 12 or so minutes of driving time. And there's actually still quite a few interesting places that I'll point interest that will be on our left. The first is the Fruta Schoolhouse, all one room of it, and it's a pretty fun photo to take. It's funny because it seems like it's an unnecessarily long way away from where we've driven here. But really, it's only a 10-minute walk from where the town was if you cross the Fremont River. Go on and turn in for a quick look, or enjoy it as we just drive on by. All right, 20 seconds ahead, we'll see the turn on our left to go and take a closer look at some of those excellent petroglyphs. Definitely a worthwhile stop. Now we're quite expert at understanding how these were made by scratching through the dark desert varnish. These were created by the Fremont people, and the range of imagery building in Washington, D.C. The Fremont rock art site we just left was chiseled into desert varnish, coating the massive cliff-forming Wingate sandstone. The white dome up ahead is formed in the Navajo sandstone. So, what is this reddish layered sedimentary rock we're driving into at the moment? You guessed it, it's the Kayenta Formation. You're getting good at this. The next car park coming up quickly on our left is for the popular 2-mile hike to Hickman Bridge, one of 2 stone arches. Some uphill is required and the trail is rated moderate. I'd say you can expect to spend up to 2 hours to hike and enjoy the sights. You can enjoy excellent views of Capitol Dome from the trail too, and even pretty good views from the car park. Capitol Reef is a place that is dominated by some fantastic geology, and I certainly want to congratulate us on being able to concentrate on so much discussion about rocks and things that happen to rocks. I've done more geology here than we normally do in other parks or on famous drives, and I'm sure that you can tell professional geologists have helped show me what I should guide you to do during our visit. We've aimed to help you see things through the eyes of what a geologist sees when they're looking at this amazing landscape. My hope is that I've helped us understand how geologists try to take the clues around us and use the data they collect to work out how the landscape came to look this way. It can be challenging with so many different clues all mixed in together. Like, here's some setups here. Or is it good enough to just enjoy the visual appeal of these amazing landscapes? For most of us, the answer is probably somewhere between the two. Anyway, clearly I am a little bit of a geology geek. And I don't make any apologies. I hope I've managed to rub some of that geekiness onto you too. After the road straightens here, a little further along we'll see a sign and then a pullout for the Grand Wash trailhead. That sound familiar? When we took the scenic drive, the first side road I hope we were able to visit was Grand Wash. Remember that I was saying Butch Cassidy reportedly hid away in there? This is the other end of that same trail. If we didn't do the walk then, but we're interested now, well then you're in luck. From this end, it's just an easy 1.25 miles to the best part, called the Narrows, where the canyon walls are only 15 feet apart, but the Navajo sandstone cliffs rise some 800 feet overhead. I recommend take some water if you go, and don't attempt the hike if it's raining or even if it looks like it might rain. Did 13 people live in a tiny one-room cabin? Sure, it wasn't easy, but it does help that the whole family didn't sleep inside the house. Only the youngest children slept in the cabin with their parents. The other children slept in the wagon or on rock alcoves. If you get out to look around, you'll see that the kids weren't the only ones sleeping in the alcoves. Look for disorganized piles of sticks, leaves, and other organic material. These are pack rat nests, also called middens. The establishment of Capitol Reef National Park was not straightforward or easy, in part because of its remoteness. After 2 decades of local lobbying for protected status, Capitol Reef National Monument was established in 1937 by Franklin Roosevelt's presidential proclamation. It took another 13 years before its budget was approved by the National Park Service. When the monument finally opened to the public in 1950, it almost immediately had to deal with hordes of uranium prospectors, along with associated road building to make it easier to get to for the first decade. Accessibility for North America. But I'll tell that story on another tour someday.